Hello, and welcome to the Disability Education and Society podcast. This is a podcast for collective learning and unlearning in the struggle for intersectional liberation. We focus on educational realms, expanding to other societal areas. We share our stories as academics as well as those of our featured guests, including disability activists involved with multifaceted dimensions of systems equity, self-determination efforts, anti-ableist, and anti-racist liberation. Join us as co-conspirators. Today's episode features Dr. Lisette E. Torres-Gerald. Dr. Torres-Gerald is a trained scientist and disabled scholar activist who is a senior researcher at TERC, a nonprofit made up of teams of math and science education and research experts. She is also the Director of Operations and Communication for the new National NSF AISL Equity Resource Center called the Reimagining Equity and Values in Informal STEM Education, or REVISE, Center. Dr. Torres-Gerald has a doctorate with a certificate in social justice from the School of Education at Iowa State University and a master's in zoology with a certificate in ecology from Miami University. Her academic research focuses on addressing racialized gender justice and disability in science and higher education. She is an active member of the Science for the People, a co-founder of Signs of Disability, Dismantling Ableism in Mathematics and Beyond, and a co-founder and former executive board member of the National Coalition for Latinx with Disabilities, or CNLD. Dr. Torres-Gerald is also an advisory board member of Science Friday's Breakthrough Dialogues program and the Invisible Disability Project, IDP. Lastly, she has been identified as an AERA Spencer Foundation Early Career Scholar and a Kavli Foundation-sponsored network leader for inclusive science communication.
Well, thank you so much, Lisette, for joining us today on the Disability Education and Society podcast. We are thrilled to have you because you do so much. I'm still learning so much about you, even though you and I have worked together before. There's so much more to you, of course, than that small interaction. And so we are both, Alexis and I, are just so happy to have you here and to have this conversation with you today. And so we would like you, Lisette, to start by having you share a personal story related to your disability journey.
Sure. So my disability journey certainly started later compared to other folks I know. I have an acquired disability called fibromyalgia, which is more, well, what they're finding is it's akin to what's being called long COVID now, but a lot of similar symptoms. But essentially, fibromyalgia is a neuromuscular condition that impacts. My understanding is that it impacts how my neurons essentially talk to the rest of my body. And so there's like a disconnect that causes me to feel pain all the time at different levels, a pain that is whole body, can travel from place to place, varies with really weird things like pressure systems and temperature, and comes with fatigue. And there is no cure. So, at least not at this point. Um, so, I was diagnosed in 2015, which was 2 years after the birth of my first child, my son. But the symptoms actually happened right after the birth of my son. So, um, my my birth story was not ideal. I had a C-section, and part of me thinks that my experience of the birthing process triggered something that was genetically dormant in my body. And this is just me hypothesizing. Um, because my sisters, who are 10 and 9 years older than me, also have fibromyalgia. One did not have children, the other does have children. So all three of us have it, but there's like no other connection aside from that we're related. So going back to the birth story, um, I was having, they were prepping me for my C-section and inserting the anesthesia that numbs you through my spine. And the doctor kept hitting my spine, which was very, very painful. And he would keep asking, is it okay? Is it okay? I'm like, no, I'm in pain. um, but finally, he worked it out. Then C-section time came. And when they removed my son, uh, I could feel a flood of really hot blood go into my chest. And it's the worst pain ever. I don't even know how to describe it, but um yeah, it's incredibly painful. And so I had to ask the same anesthesiologist to give me medication for that to reduce the pain, to the point where when they gave me my son, after he gave me the um I guess it was an injection, who knows, I was so out of it, um that I was shivering uncontrollably. And so that not very ideal situation, then, I'm at home with my son and I start um feeling like I can't get comfortable. Like no matter how I shifted or sat or laid down, I was in pain. I didn't know why. Um and then a lot of people say, oh, it's motherhood, your first time mom, like just rest when the baby rests is always the like advice you're given. Um, and so I was trying to do that, trying to take care of myself as well as the baby. Um, but the pain and the fatigue just were not going away, which was very concerning to me because the pain levels would shift and um, the location of the pain would shift, and to the point where I just couldn't really um, do things the way that I wanted to do things. So I had to investigate and ask my family doctor and then a rheumatologist, and then just trying to find answers to what was going on. They did test me for lupus, um, which that's what the rheumatologist thought initially that I had, but my blood work kind of ruled that out. So fibromyalgia is basically a, a diagnosis through exclusion, is what they say. But essentially, they rule out all the things that it can't be. And then if they have no clue, they essentially say, it's fibromyalgia. Not ideal. But it at least gave me a sense of, okay, this is kind of what it is. And there are other people who kind of fit this. So, like, it helped me start thinking about myself, my newly disabled body, um, and thinking about how it not only impacts my scholarship and how I go about doing things, but also just generally my life generally. Like I started becoming more intentional, um because of my energy levels. The spoonies say, you only have so many spoons of energy. Um, and so it's has made me prioritize things differently now. Um, has made me, well, I was critical before, but has made me even more critical about higher education and um, the social cultural context of STEM, um, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. Um, and also just thinking about more recently mothering, like how does my disability impact how I mother my children, and also build relationships with others. So that's a little bit of my disability story. Um, but to be honest, I think my story begins more with my mom. Um, my observations of her, because, well, right now she's legally blind, but she has retinitis pigmentosa. There we go. Um, and so, being the youngest of three girls, um, I saw a little bit more of my mom's processing of that. And um because she started losing her eyesight, and we didn't know at the time, but reflecting back there were signs. She started losing her eyesight in her early 40s, which is where I am, the age I am now. And seeing her navigate that and also struggle with that because of the Latino community and the the messages that she received as a child, about being disabled. So I guess I've always been thinking about disability, but I haven't really got serious about it until it it was me, essentially, impacting me um, more specifically.
I'm thinking of two things, Lisette, as I listen to you. One is a realization that is just dawning on me as you talk about fibromyalgia. Um, it really fits into a neurodivergent experience. And a lot of neurodivergent folks prefer not to use the word disabled to refer to their experiences. So the other area of thinking that jumps to my mind is this idea of pan disability. Pablo and I have written a couple of articles around this idea of pan disability, trying to find cross disability ways to connect across different types of disability experiences. And it's
Mhm.
interesting how you, um, as a third child, a third girl with your mother and your own mothering, you're sort of bridging these different types of disability experiences. So there is something about pan disability that surrounds your two counter stories, which is a single counter story, your own life, sort of the whole life process, and the flow of those connections um, amazes me and corroborates the need to think more of relational processes that connect us all disabled folks as opposed to having these diagnostic things that separate us and often make us be divided even within a disability structure. I was um, outside of the microphone, we were talking about these blind disability organizations that are competing for resources and how strategically they collide and that sort of thing. So it's a I think your story is powerful in highlighting that sort of relationality and those kinds of dynamics, the fluidity of everything.
Thank you. I'm happy you said that, Alexis. I've actually been sitting with that more. That was more of a new realization for me as well. Um, and ironically came from two separate kind of invitations um to write book chapters. So one book chapter, um the focus was on discrete mothering. It's going to be an edited book, I think, or edited book or a special issue of something. Um, but each one of us had a different take on what does it mean to be either looking through the critical disability, discrit, looking at discrit and thinking about what does it mean to use discrit as a disabled mother. But also, or some folks were, some of my colleagues were thinking about it in terms of teaching children in their own classrooms and relating that back to discrete mothering. So I had that thinking happening. And then another book chapter invitation happened, um, that was more focused on disability and family. And they had asked me to kind of speak on being Latina and the perceptions of disability in the Latino community. And then I started thinking about and how it shaped my activism. And so I started thinking about my mom. And then so I called the book chapter Learning from the Couch Cushion, because sadly, a lot of my time that my mom spends as a blind Latina is sitting on the couch. Both of those stories have kind of come together and have made like this full circle reflection on Latinidad and disability and mothering. And so it's something that I'm still kind of sitting with.
Right. I'm gonna let Paulo speak, but I want to, for our audience, spell out this discrete idea. It's the framework combines disability studies and critical race theory. Some of our episodes dive into some of these issues, but I love the fact that somebody is thinking of writing about discrete mothering because it takes the framework outside the classroom, and I think it's an important thing that needs to happen within discrete. It's been very much a classroom
Yes.
related kind of thing, and talking about discrete mothering and connecting it to other dimensions outside the schooling set of dynamics to me seems quite indispensable to make the framework stronger and more expansive. Um, so I'm looking forward to seeing that chapter when it comes out. So let me know.
Yeah, I'll definitely share it.
Yeah, same here. I think you all presented at the American Education Research Association, correct?
Did
On
did.
this topic of discrete mothering. So yeah, I heard some really great reviews from those who attended that session. So the book chapter is definitely going to be awesome for folks to read more about those experiences. I was also thinking when you were sharing your stories about the birth experiences you had, uh, it sounded very, very similar to what my then partner went through. And she was also a person of color, East Asian. And I, I, the feeling was that, and I think what you were saying was this idea that the doctors were very like dismissive, like this like asking if it hurts, and you were like, yeah, it hurts a lot. And I think that's what my former spouse said too, is like it hurts like hell. But then like that was it. Like they didn't care like after that. They just like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
we'll just go through it. Like so it just made me think also about like birth complications of women of color, that
Yeah, and
how
maybe the
prevalent that is.
pains. Yeah, maybe the
Mhm.
pains are different when they're women of color versus white women. That would be an interesting exploration, right?
Yeah, I mean, we know that that doctors have this idea that black people, right? They're highly tolerant. They have a higher tolerance of pain. I mean, that's well like established in the medical field that doctors have for some reason think that they that black people are beyond human because they can tolerate so much pain. So I'm wondering too about how it extends to like women of color in birth, right? And I don't have the statistics, but it seems like uh, some of those things could be happening as well.
Yeah, I know that was definitely something on my mind during that whole process. Um, just knowing, especially in the Black community, how many women have died giving birth because they were ignored, because of the ridiculous assumptions that some doctors have about the pain tolerance of Black people. And I do think that's something that more work needs to be done around. Um, I have been through one of my projects at TERC, and TERC is a math and science nonprofit organization, research organization located in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so, one of the grant projects that I'm on, I have the honor of being able to talk to uh, Native peoples at the undergraduate, graduate, and professional levels in STEM and hearing their stories. And so, one of them is this fabulous and brilliant undergraduate. Actually, she just graduated, so not anymore. But now grads, now she's in a medical program. But she started thinking about these issues with maternity and um, morbidity during childbirth for Native communities. And so, because of that, because of her interest and experiences as a Native person, um, plus people kind of supporting her dreams of doing this kind of research, she's been um, researching these things in the Native community and kind of sharing with people how Native women are also experiencing really harsh childbirth situations, and we don't have there tends to be, especially with the native populations, there tends to be um, the small n problem where small sample size, then they're like it won't matter. um, that's a whole nother STEM issue, culture issue, that people should think about. But it's not always about the number, the sample size. Um, it's I'm trying to remember who said this, but there was someone who was speaking at a conference who said data bleeds, and just remembering that you're working with real people. It's not just a sample size.
Yeah, I've been reading this work by a South African thinker called Necropolis, talking about these issues in a philosophical way, and it's really striking how the coloniality in its different forms, and um, even the digital era are filled with these, yeah, data bleeds or whatever dimensions that are coloring data and treating people differently just because of the color of their skins. No, it's interesting because you are really connected to a lot of very interesting um, different communities and doing works with organizations that are connected to different sub communities. I am particularly very interested in asking you about another organization that you were a founding member in 2015, around that same time that your story took place. It's called Coalición Nacional of Latinx, the Latinx con Discapacidades in Chicago, and I wanna ask you about the trajectory. What you think has changed in these 8 years since 2015 when NCLD was founded, and how you see sort of that evolution now, especially because some of these Latinx folks are also um, American Indian with very different experiences, and the types of coloniality they face are different. They're less grounded on issues of sovereignty like the American Indian tribes do. Um, and of course, the infrastructures are set up differently so that um, healthcare and everything is experienced differently. So I just want to throw that at you, which is another way to um, blend all these different connecting points that you are experiencing yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Going back to my diagnosis in 2015, as an academic, one of the ways in which I was processing things was through writing. So I had written a blog post um, about my experience as a disabled Latina. And through there, I was contacted with um, Catherine Perez and Michelle Garcia, they were trying to collect a nice number of other folks who were Latina or Latino and disabled, because they were thinking of creating a community, a coalition of folks that can push some issues and make our numbers visible or more apparent, since a lot of us were processing our own identities alone, and there hasn't been like a more social model conversation around disability in Latino communities. I think there's variation certainly within the Latino communities in terms of their understandings of disability, and their, especially in the United States, their understanding of the rights are that they could leverage or use. Um, they, especially immigrant populations, may not even know that those things exist. So we were thinking about all of that, thinking about our own journeys. And so we created the National Coalition of Latinxes with Disabilities with we had our first conference in 2017, I think. Since then, I mean, a lot of us have gone on to do other things. So, for example, Catherine Perez, who was the original driving force, I would say, She's at the Colhost Center in California. But a lot of us were grad students or community organizers, and we were trying to not only educate the Latino communities in the United States about what their rights were, but also sharing with them that there's a different way of thinking about disability beyond the medical model, and that we wanted to make things better for disabled Latinos and to be intentional around thinking about Latinos in an intersectional way rather than just saying, just focusing on the disability or just focusing on the Latinidad. In terms of what's shifted over the past 8 years, I would say in terms of topics, I think there are more mainstream disability or mainstream using air quotes mainstream disability organizations that have become more interested in intersectionality as it pertains to Latinos and disability. Growing number of requests about folks who can speak to that. But I do think progress is slow. So I wish I could say that there was something specific that I'm like, yeah, it's been awesome. But I think it's like a growing awareness and curiosity about disability and the Latino community. I have been noticing that there seems to be more representation in terms of disabled Latinos, certain Latino stars coming out and saying, "Hey, I have this. I'm neurodivergent, or I have, this condition." And there's been greater identification with disability as well in some ways. But I do think there's a lot that needs to be researched and addressed. We don't have any data. I mean, I haven't been delving into the numbers lately. So if I'm incorrect, please share your data with me. But the World Institute on Disability, their first and last report on Latinos with disabilities was 2016. And I haven't seen any other type of report like that since. So I'm curious I'm curious if there's a report out there. I haven't had the time to look for it, but I'd be interested in it. I do know the Urban Institute right now. They will be sharing on their website a policy report that they generated that I actually was a participant in terms of, so they gathered a bunch of us that were familiar with disability and immigration and kind of had us talk about our views in terms of what we're seeing with disabled immigrants and how it impacts their financial well-being. So that included all sorts of things like education, healthcare, employment. And so we just had this long conversation about what is the status. And so that those intersections and overlaps of needs have yet to be addressed, but I think there's more people who are thinking about it. So if you're interested in that Urban Institute policy report, it's called Disabled Immigrants Face Intersecting Barriers to Education and Employment. It's by Dulce Gonzalez. and Paula Echave.
Hi there. While we intend to make our podcast as accessible as possible, we ask those that have the financial means to support us by subscribing as a patron to our podcast for as little as $5 a month. To subscribe, go to our website, disabilityed.podbean.com. By subscribing as a patron, you will help ensure that we can continue to create and share new episodes while supporting other co-conspirators who face financial and health difficulties. For those with financial difficulties, please connect with us about obtaining a free copy of our books and/or engaging in additional conversations with us. You can also support this show by hitting the follow button. Share this podcast with among your network and leave us a comment and positive rating. Your support means so much.
Going back to the Discrit foundational article, the 2013 one thing that I do like about that article is the emphasis on interlocking oppressions. A lot of people think of intersectionality as just the blending of variables, but it's not just like that. For instance, in the same way that folks with disabilities are divided, and the reason why pan disability is so important, we Latinx are also experiencing the divide and conquer through mechanisms like citizenship. You are Puerto Rican, that's your ancestry. A lot of, thousands and thousands of Venezuelans are coming through the border, people from Central America, much more than Mexicans, which used to be the trend before. And a lot of these very moving targets, because these are things that are happening as we speak. And a lot of the tactics have changed, pushing a lot of these immigrants into New York and Chicago and these big areas, strategy that wasn't used before, so that the undocumented problem was more of a frontera stuff, something that was experienced at the border, but now it's really pushed to the center of politics, and it's definitely going to be very important as an electoral issue in the next elections. How do you see that impacting the future? I mean, this dynamicity, because the issues of Latinidad involve this divide and conquer, and the issues of disability also divide and conquer through these medical diagnoses and all these tricky ways to have, the interlocking oppressions that we experience in terms of intersectionality are not as easily managed through quantitative articles. Nothing against the Urban Institute, but that sort of approach only gives you the tip of the iceberg when it comes to understanding the qualitative contours of this set of issues. And I know you have a better handle on some of those things. So if you could comment for our
Sure.
audience a little bit of that, yeah.
Sure. I completely agree as a quant person turned qual person. I do think there's a lot more interviews and observations and just critical analyses that need to be done generally. In terms of what I'm seeing in the future, sadly, I don't, as much as I see awareness picking up, I also think that there are some people, like you said, there will be some people who will use divide and conquer. So what I'm starting to witness is focuses shifting to disability, rather than focusing on race, but still not the intersection. I'm also seeing, we know that in connecting to STEM in particular, but I guess it could be with employment generally. We know that there's going to be some careers, STEM employment in particular, that are going to increase, and there will be a need there. And unfortunately, I see a lot of our disabled people of color um, not being able to benefit from that due to the many kinds of barriers that impact their progress through the whole STEM journey, from even before they decide to be scientists or want to pursue science. There's already stuff that is keeping them from that type of career, but also financial stability, because STEM jobs tend to be higher paying. Um, so I think there's going to be more gaps between the haves and the have-nots in the future, in every sector, in my opinion, from education to employment to housing to healthcare.
Then
Um,
you add undocumented issues. Some states
that layer on, yeah.
they allow undocumented people to study in the universities, but once they are out, they don't have a way to use that to pursue a
Yeah.
career, even if they do a STEM career. If they were able to surmount the obstacles, then they come out without any real possibility to enter the job market.
And
Um,
debt sometimes, depending on where
oh,
they get.
e- exactly. But this STEM stuff, I think it's a great segue to talk about Paulo's question, the question about signs of disabilities.
Mm,
Um,
Yeah,
would
I
love to.
think you were of many things you're doing. The signs of disability, it's spelled SINES, is another great work that you're doing. I just wanted to have you share more about that work. And I do really quickly go back to your point about intersectionality, because it really resonated with me quite a bit, as coming from a Asian American community, having Asian Chinese American kind of lineage. My parents are immigrants to the United States, and we grew up in the state of Kansas. But I always knew that they, just growing up, they were very attuned to issues of race, as I think many of the folks we were part of. Like, race was a big part. I mean, there was no question about their understanding of racial issues here in the U.S. And similar to you, Lisette, I see a big need for that intersection with disability, because when it comes to disability, at least in my experiences with the Asian American, Chinese American community, is very much a whole separate thing. Like, and I think there's not as much as a very keen knowledge of that. I always just kind of reflect back on my mom, as you talked about, as someone who influenced your work quite a bit. And my mom, she, in terms of U.S. education, you wouldn't say she went really high, whatever that means. I mean, I think, just had a pretty, I think, up to elementary school, but otherwise, I mean, she knew race issues, and she would talk to me about it. And when I was young, I was like, yeah, yeah, whatever, mom. But now, like, it makes a lot of sense. It's like, oh, I wish I would have listened more to you, and had those conversations, more deep conversation. And now we have the conversation now, but now, having this intersectional approach, I think, also in the Asian American community, I think that's something that's also very important. So I just wanted to make that quick statement there. Uh, but I do want to have you share more about the signs of disability, the great work that you were doing, I think, and you talk about someone you were doing that work with as well.
oh, well, thank you, Paolo. I mean, signs of disability. Uh, I'll take credit for the sad pun. I had said so. um, it's a project that came out of curiosity and friendship with Daniel Reinholds from San Diego State. We had been chatting and talking about counter narratives and STEM, and um, we started just brainstorming. He was like, "What if we just, I don't know, make a website?" And I said, "I'd be down for that. Like, let's do it." And he was like, "What do you think? Do you think people would like send us stuff? Like, would it be?" So we were just brainstorming, thinking about what can we do to get more, and we focused on mathematics because that's um Daniel's background is math education and statistics. But given given both our work in STEM and thinking about just the experiences that we've either heard or witnessed, saying, we should really collect these stories not only to for like historical purposes, but in particular to get younger scientists, give them stories that they could potentially see themselves in. Um, and also to be able to challenge ableism in STEM. So we wanted to get people to start to think about disability justice in math education, um, thinking about those counter stories, and um, just dreaming about what would, and Paolo, and of course knows this, and Catherine Yee, we've just been thinking about, how can we build a community of disabled, well, in our case for the website, disabled mathematicians and math educators, but essentially saying, making making sure that they see themselves as mathematicians as well, um that, and to counter the assumptions that people have about mathematics and disability. I think with math, um most people think it's an inherent thing that you're just good at, um and of course, when you think most people think, oh, if you're disabled, especially intellectually disabled, there's no way you could be able to be a mathematician, or those really deficit oriented um views of who should be a mathematician or how to do math. That's another whole other philosophical thing. um but essentially our website is meant to begin to share the stories, kind of push math education, curriculum, pedagogy, um, but also we're hoping to create a counter space. So we're hoping to start bringing the folks who have been so generous with sharing their stories with us together to try to think about how can we begin to shift math education. um, what are some actions that we as a collective group can start to do to kind of um, push people to think about math and math education in a different way. Um, so that's kind of like what we're working on now in terms of the website, is thinking about how we can push the conversation off the website and be more relational, and engaged with one another. I would say in terms of main achievements, we have the website, which thanks to Daniel, Daniel had some funds from his startup when he started at San Diego. So well, that's the website is up. Um, and what I find interesting and exciting in some ways is we haven't been up that long, um, but we've been getting inquiries, either people who are interested in submitting their own stories or who want to engage in a deeper way. So, like asking about, oh, are you going to hold a conference or are you going to like, I think there is a need out there, and a community of people who are looking to change math education for the better. Um, so I think in terms of, I guess, our role, like I said, Daniel and I started this basically because we wanted to. It was, no one told us we had to do it. No one, no one this isn't funded by any one organization. Like it's very much just me and Daniel. And we're just slowly collecting and sharing the stories and making sure that we're staying in touch with the people who have reached out to us.
And for those who are engaging with the podcast, we're going to have the link to that website if you want to connect with Lisette or Daniel. Uh, I do want to ask a follow-up question, Lisette, because
Mhm.
I imagine that there are going to be educators, there are going to be family members who are listening to the podcast, engaging with the podcast, and wondering, like, when you say like ableism in STEM education, like, what do you mean by that?
Oh, sure. Oh my God, ableism. Um, ableism is everywhere. Um, when I when I think about ableism in STEM education, there's it extends from things as obvious as your countertops are too high or for people to reach things, or you don't have enough space to move around a lab or a classroom, if especially if you have a mobility aid. But I also think, I mean, those are very obvious physical things, but I also think ableism in STEM are a lot of it is the assumptions behind whether a person can or can't do something. So a lot of the ways I see it play out is people not being approached for opportunities in STEM just because they have a particular impairment. Um, like, oh, well, we're not gonna tell them about this particular research experience because it involves observations of animals, or it involves working with glassware, and they have a they're neurodivergent and have hard time controlling their arms. There's like no so like there's already, even before the person is there in the space, there are already all these thoughts about what this person is capable of. um and so with, like I said, with mathematics, a lot of it has to do with um these assumptions about mathematics being you have to have some kind of inherent gift, something that you were born with that just makes you amazing with numbers. I think there's people also forget that there's different kinds of math. So just because you can't do one type of math doesn't mean you can't do another type. Um, but also the ways in which people derive answers, I think is something also that is questioned. Usually or at least when I was growing up, they're doing some interesting stuff now that I'm like, wow, I wish I learned math this way. It would have been so much easier. Like my son now, he's 10 and he's already doing multiplication and like these and basic algebra. And I'm like, I was not there at that age because that but anyways, I think there's a lot of possibility within the disability community in terms of how we approach things and process things that I think STEM is just missing out on because of these ridiculous assumptions, because of our socialization with how science is supposed to be done. There's this whole, you know, assumption behind how you do science. When the reality, no one really does science how we're supposedly that scientific method, like no one really go follows that by the book to do what they have to do. So long-winded is that ableism is essentially embedded in a lot of STEM and STEM education approaches.
I feel like we're only scratching the surface with a lot of these things. We could probably do one episode for each of the topics we've been touching with you. But I want to make sure we talk a little bit also about your work with informal science and equity issues um, with and by people with disabilities, because that's another area. I mean, we typically think of exclusion in STEM issues at the classroom level, and when it comes to activism, we usually don't jump into trying to deal with issues of informal science or citizen science or those kinds of things that are outside the classroom that allow for popular education types of things that would connect people to STEM, even if they don't have a formal instructional connection. And I think that's a very important aspect of how folks with disabilities would be excluded and also closing the door or any backdoor mechanisms for them to penetrate the STEM world as well. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Of course. So my current adventure is with the Revise Center. So my background has our Revise Center logo, which is a little green plant with roots in the ground. And the roots are little nodes of different colors, kind of related to like connecting the different sectors of STEM. And the plant is growing and there's talk bubbles right at the top. So we wanted to emphasize the need for relationship building and engagement with one another. And it also, the plant forms the V in the word revise. And the center name, the center name was controversial, and that could be another story to share. But when we submitted our proposal, and this is an NSF funded collaborative grant, it's a cooperative agreement with NSF. So essentially, how that's different from a typical NSF grant is that we're actually working in tandem with NSF. So they uh, they definitely have their thoughts about things that we do and share. It's always a negotiation. But luckily, we have program officers that are very kind. But the Revise Center stands for Reimagining Equity and Values in Informal STEM Education. And we chose Revise very intentionally because we felt that we were still working within a system that was not originally built for us. And at most, we wouldn't be able to transform it per se, but we could revise some of the things that are happening in the system. So we're in our second year of funding, and from the very beginning, since the proposal phase, my team has essentially said we are centering race and disability. So in everything we do, we think about discrit, disability justice, and we were very open with NSF about that. Luckily, the Advancing Informal STEM Learning, or AZLE program, has been trying to shift the informal science field for the past few years. And so they were looking for folks, luckily, that are wanting to push the conversation in a different direction. As some folks listening may know, NSF has been focused on broadening participation, and a lot of that has resulted in good work and some increases in representation, but not to the extent where we're seeing the same percentage of people in science as we see in the community at large.
Just
So,
real quick, Lisette, just
yeah,
jump
sure.
in. And NSF is,
Mm,
to those that might not be familiar with NSF, you say a little bit more about that organization.
sure. It's full of acronyms. National Science Foundation. So the National Science Foundation is a federal um, organization charged with providing funds to um, science innovations and um, anything essentially that they see could be of benefit to science and society as a whole and economic prosperity for the nation. Um, so our charge as a center through the AZLE program is not just to broaden participation, but to actually get the field researchers and practitioners dedicated to informal STEM learning to get them to not just think about equity, but to embed equity in everything that they do. So if you look at the new AZLE solicitation from this past year, essentially they'll be looking for not just you saying equity, equity, equity throughout your proposal, um, but they're going to be looking for substance. So before you could get away with writing a project and submitting it to NSF and with a, oh yeah, I'm going to share my results with this community, check, broadening participation, done. But now it's to the point where they want to see, like, um, if you say you're going to be centering race and disability, then you better have a disabled person of color as a collaboration, and not just collaborate, but they need to have a meaningful position in your project. Um, if you're going to be paying stipends, or if you're going to be asking disability communities, especially disabled people of color, to participate in things, then how are you making sure that's in your budget? Not saying, oh, come to my thing, and extracting data from them and not properly paying them back for their effort. So our charge, which is really great, is to just keep pushing that, essentially. Keep kind of challenging folks to think about how do we support folks who have been doing the work, have been doing the equity work. How can we strengthen that? but while also bringing other folks on board who may be a little more hesitant. Um, how do we and so a lot of what we do is we've been trying to model what we think more people should be doing. So I actually wrote, for example, in terms of disability justice, and thinking about disability in informal STEM, I wrote a blog post that's on our website on informalscience.org, where I talk about the very first webinar that we had. And the blog post is called It Begins With Us, Modeling an Accessible Webinar. And essentially I describe all the things we considered and our approach to the webinar and things that of course could be improved. My team has been very good about being transparent with not just with each other, but we want to be transparent with the field. So in this next year, we're going to be sharing more of our approach to things and resources, and also hearing from folks in the field and having them either give webinars or virtual workshops, so that people are connecting some of that theory that they think, oh, it's just up here in the air or in the head, but trying to connect the dots from the theory to the practice, and saying, we believe in disability justice. These are the things that we have done that are related to that theory, to try to show people how exactly everything ties together and the importance of that.
As I said, I mean, we could definitely go very deep into a lot of these components, but we're pretty much teasing out the audience so they follow up with you guys to learn some more. And maybe, Paolo, we should probably schedule a follow up.
Yeah, I think we also want to be very respectful of your time. We schedule an hour, and I think we're getting over that hour. But there's so much awesome things that you're doing. All of the links we'll be sharing on our podcast notes page, and I also want to really quickly just say how awesome the Science for the People work that you're doing is as well. This is my first time going through that website, and I was just amazed. And I want to share that with folks engaging in the podcast. That's another awesome website to.
Yeah. Well, we've had an amazing SciComm illustrator, Matteo Farinella. He's amazing. So a lot of the visually appealing things is him. But yeah, Science for the People is amazing. And I give them all the credit. It's been a joy to work with them. I wish I could work more with them, but with the Revised Center now. So I keep tabs on them though.
Yeah, I can't wait to dive into some of the content. I mean, some of the content there, I haven't gotten into it, but just the headings that they're just
lost.
Yeah,
especially the archive. Have you seen the archive yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
There's a lot
We
of awesome things.
Too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and for folks engaging in the podcast, that's another great thing that the awesome Lisette is doing. And so thank you, Lisette, so much for taking time out of your day to join us, to have this wonderful conversation. And we just want to close out by having you share anything that, how people can connect with you if they want to connect with you, and where they can learn more about the things that you're doing.
Oh my goodness. So I don't think I'm too hard to find. I'm holding on to X, aka Twitter, just just because the disability I was home for the disability community for so long, and I know folks are jumping ship, but I'm still on there. That's Lisette E. Torres 3. Um, I'm also more active on LinkedIn now, and you could just search for my full name, Lisette Torres-Gerald. Um, if you want to email me specifically about the signs of disability, my email is Lisette, Lisette, at signsofdisability.com. And then anything else, you could use my TERC email address, which is Lisette_Torres at TERC.edu. And I'm sure Paolo will make sure all those things are on there.
I will for sure. And so thank you so
I'll,
much, Lisette. Yeah, it's been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Alexis, as well. As always, as we close out, we're hoping for you all the best and for our audience members the best as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for engaging with the DES podcast. We post new episodes every few weeks. The DES podcast is made possible and sustainable in solidarity with you and those who generously volunteer their time to converse with us. We hope you join us on our next episode.